In part 2 of our ad design series, we're going to start bringing in our assets. We're going to try to match the sketch that I did earlier, so I have them viewing side by side. In our previous video, we set up the document, so we're really ready to start bringing things in. Unlike InDesign, where I recommended that you do a file and paste, or file and place rather, what you want to do in Photoshop is do file and open. And find the image that you want to bring in and open it up. In Photoshop, you actually can just drag and drop from one document window to the next, or if you prefer, you can do a select all, which is Command A on a Mac or Control A on the PC, and then take your move tool, which is the selection, the arrow tool up here at the top of the toolbox, and just drag and drop from one window to the next. Except that, hey Houston, we have a problem. You'll see that we are way zoomed in on these books that are way in the background, and what that means is that this picture is way too big for our document window. If I zoom out, you can kind of see how big that is. Way too big. So, what we really want to do is get into the best practice of resizing things so that the resolution matches and the size matches what our final output is going to be. To get rid of this image that I just dragged in, I can do a select all again, and I can just hit the delete key, or better, I'm going to undo that with a Command Z or Control Z on a PC. I can go over to this palette called the Layers palette, and you'll see when I dragged that image from one screen onto the next that I got a brand new layer. The background was the white ground that we started with. Layer 1 is the stuff that we just dragged in. So I can actually take that, click on the layer, and drag and drop, and there's a tiny little garbage can at the bottom of the Layers palette. I can delete that way. I am going to deselect my selection, which is Command or Control D. I'm going to zoom back in, which is Command or Control plus sign. That's to zoom in, minus is to zoom out. So that gets us back to a document window. Okay, so if we're not just going to be able to drag and drop, we need to be able to resize some other way. So I'm going to click over into the image that I'm bringing in. Again, I'm going to deselect there, Command D. To resize this, I am going to go up to the image menu, and I am going to choose Image Size. First thing you're going to want to do when you get into the image size dialog box is get your resolution to the same resolution as your output document. And since we're doing a print in this one, I am going to click off the resample button. I am going to change my resolution to 300, and then I am going to click resample back on. That just simply makes the document dimensions or the resolution change without actually changing the file size itself, which is 49 megabytes, which is pretty big. Well, we know that our document size is 4.5, or rather 4 by 5.5, so I could go ahead and I could make this 4 inches. We'd have 4 by 6, which is much closer to what we need. It's still going to be a little bit extra. I'm going to make it a hair's breadth bigger, just because I want you to see how to resize an image modestly, manually, if you need to. So I get basically 5 by 7.5. And I'm going to tell it, okay. And you see it significantly reduces the size of the image. From here, again, we could select all, we could copy, bring over to our document and paste, or we can just drag and drop. So now we're in here, we're a lot closer to size. I'm going to give myself a little bit more work room here. I'm going to close this image because we don't need it anymore. Get us back to our style. Now, our sketch. Now, we don't quite fit. I said I was going to show you how to manually resize something like this. Well, in order to select the image, you need to go over to the Layers palette and make sure the layer that the image is on is active. And if you want to select just what's within the document boundary, you would again choose Command A or Control A. But we know that there's more beyond this. So in order to select what is beyond this, what you do is you make sure your layer is selected and you hit Command T or Control T for transform. And you can see that now we can see where the edges of this are. And the default for this is to resize in proportion. So you don't need to hold on any special keys. All you need to do is drag those anchor points, and it's going to bring the size of this down. I'm going to shrink a little bit. So I could manually bring this, or again, we could have just sized this in the image size dialog box and brought it down to 4 inches wide. Once you're happy with the size that it is, you can just hit your return key or enter key, and it'll take it to the size that it's supposed to be now. So that is manually transforming an image to the size to fit your document boundary. Well, there are other things that we can do. My original design calls to add the flag to the bottom, but what if I wanted to do something crazy like add the flag to the background image? That would mean I would have to remove the background image. Well, that's where our selection tools come in, and we have several selection tools that do different things. They are usually the tools that are immediately under that move tool in your toolbox. First one is a rectangle. Click and hold, it will have a rectangle, an ellipse, and a single row and a single column. So that's 1 pixel wide or 1 pixel high. Rectangular marquee does exactly what it sounds like. You come down into your document window and you drag a rectangle or a square. You want to constrain it to a perfect square, you hold down the shift key while you're dragging. And then when you've made a selection, you can either take that move tool and cut that piece out and move it with you. I'm going to undo, which is Command Z or Control Z. Or you could copy this and you could paste it. Copy is Command or Control C, and paste is Command or Control V. And you'll notice that when I pasted it, I'm looking over here at the layers palette, it pasted it onto a new layer. So now I could grab just that layer and move it, and now I have a kind of a duplicate of that piece, which is a little weird. But you might find yourself doing that for some decorative purpose. I'm going to go ahead and delete that whole layer because I really don't need that as a selection by clicking and dragging the layer into its little trash can on the bottom of the layers palette. So that's one way of doing it. But what I'm really wanting to do, a rectangle is not going to help me when I'm trying to get rid of all of this background. We do have a freeform lasso tool, which frankly is kind of hard to use. It really requires you to be really, really good with your mouse and really, really stick to the edge. And no matter how many years I've been doing this, that's just hard. So, I mean, I can spend the time to go all the way around this, but it's not that great. Close up my selection. And just for the sake of argument, I am going to copy this and paste it right in place. And in order to see what that selection looks like, in your layers palette, next to each layer is a little eyeball. If you click the eyeball, that will get rid of it. And you see what a sloppy selection that is. So that's really not what we want. So I'm going to turn my layer visibility back on. I'm going to delete that layer I just copied and pasted. There's actually a better tool for making selections like this, and it is nested under the next selection tool down, which is an object selection tool, the quick selection tool, or the magic wand tool. Quick selection tool is really, really great if you have something very, very simple that's already largely isolated by a solid color. You can just use a quick selection tool and click on the thing and it's going to select the whole thing. Probably not going to do very much for me here. By the way, it's bringing in, see that tiny little pinprick? That is the size of the selection tool. If you want to make that bigger or smaller, you can use the right and left bracket keys. No additional keys necessary. Just I am hitting the right side bracket key and making my selection tool bigger. So if I came down here and I clicked the object selection tool, it got a little bit of it. I can hold down the option key and I can continue to grab more until I get most of what I want. And you see that it actually does a modestly better job than the other tool did. It still had bits and pieces of things you'd have to clean up. The other tool that is very, very useful, I'm going to deselect that, is the object selection tool. Object selection tool, if something's got a fairly defined boundary, and my person here kind of does. just dragging a marquee around the whole thing and letting it do its job. And you see that it does as good of a job as that other tool I was just using. I still need a few modifications, but it did it in one grab. I'm going to clean this selection up a little bit. I'm going to zoom in. There is a little magnifying glass on the bottom of the toolbar, so I can zoom in a little closer to see what I'm doing. Now what I need to do is I need to add and subtract from some of these pieces. So I'm going to go back to that selection tool. And if you want to, there are little tools up here to modify the selection. The first tool is the default. The second one is add to selection. So anything that you click on and drag around will get added to the selection. See, I missed a little bit of the book cover, so I'm gonna just see if I can grab a little. Actually, it might be better to do a quick selection tool with the modifications part. Bring my brush size down with the left bracket. Selecting always takes a little bit of extra work. Now I want to remove this little piece in here, so I would go and choose the next tool over, which is the subtract from selection. So I kind of drag in that area a little bit. It will remove most of what I need there. I got a little bit of extra here that I don't need. So I'm going to keep clicking on those things. Then I have a bit on the bottom here. If I want to slide this whole thing within my window, I'm going to hold down the space bar and it gives me a grabber tool so I can just scooch this over. Now I want to add this piece to the selection, so I'm going back up to my my selection tool and I'm going to grab the add to selection and I'm going to kind of drag through that. So this is not a perfect selection by any means, but it's better than we had. I'm going to zoom out using the command minus key, and I am going to do the same thing I did before, and that is copy, Command or Control C, and Command or Control V, paste. I'm going to hide my bottom layer. So you can kind of see it did a better job. It's not perfect, especially around the hair. We got some fine tuning that we have to do. But for the most part, you kind of see how this tool works. The other thing that is good to do, instead of deleting backgrounds, is you can actually, once you have made your selection, instead of cutting and pasting, I'm gonna restore my selection marquee by holding down my command key and clicking on that cutout layer. So my selection is back. I'm not going to deselect, but I'm going to delete that top layer, the copy paste, by dragging it to the trash can. And now another way of kind of removing background without losing and deleting all of the pixels is there is a thing at the bottom of your toolbox that is a masking tool. And it looks like a little square with a circle in the middle of it. This is at the bottom of the layers palette. So with that layer selected and an active selection, if I click on the mask tool, it gets rid of that background too. Like I said, this is a really, really sloppy selection. I will show you in a later class how to clean these things up better. But let's say, for example, that now I have a completely empty background, and let's say I want to drop something into that background. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open my flag image, which was the other thing I selected. Opening it separately. Again, I'm going to do the best practice of going to image and image size and making sure that it's the right resolution that I need. Click off resample, change resolution to 300, resample back on. And this time, because this image actually has a black border that I don't want, I'm not going to reduce this to 4 inches. I'm going to make it something like 6 inches so I can crop within. Actually, I need to make sure that it is high enough, so I got to make it at least 5 by 5, 5.5 inches tall. Or, again, same issue, 6.5 inches tall. Then I'm going to tell it OK. Now, I am going to take my rectangular marquee and I am going to select just a rectangular chunk of this, and I am going to copy, Command C, and I'm going to bring back my other my working image, which is down this tab up here, and I'm going to go ahead and paste. Now that flag kind of covers the top of everything. If I want to move it to the back, the way you do that is you move the layer. So go to the Layers palette, click and drag and move that below. So now I have this flag image behind my suffering student, which is kind of cool. It would be better, of course, if we cleaned up the edges. But that's one thing that you can do. I am actually going to bring it, I'm going to leave it right where it is. I'm actually going to get rid of the layer mask now because I want to go back to the original design that I created. So I'm going to click on that layer that has the layer mask. I'm going to click on the layer mask itself. You see that it's that and anchored right to the image on that layer. I'm going to click on the mask itself and just drag the mask alone to the garbage can. Do I want to apply it? No, I want to delete it. So now I'm back to normal. One more thing I want to show you with the layers that's kind of fun to play with. I'm going to go back and I'm going to bring that flag to the top again. Just rearrange the layers by clicking and dragging. At the top of the Layers palette, there is a little pull-down menu that says Normal, and next to it is Opacity. Well, opacity is transparency, so I can drag down that opacity. And if I wanted to do sort of an overlay effect, I could do that. I'm going to bring that back to 1. But under the Normal are something called blending modes. When you have two layers stacked on top of one of each other and you add a blending mode, it tells the pixels on the top how to interact with the pixels that are below it. And if you kind of scroll through, you can kind of see some of the effects. Darken and multiply and color burn. You can kind of see where you could have fun with adding images on top of images or just colors on top of, and getting some funky textural effects. And texture is one of our compositional elements to consider. So, just something to play with. I am not going to do any of these today, so I'm going to take it back to normal and 100%. I am going to bring my... Actually, what I'm going to do is I am going to move my flag down, because what I really wanted to do was have just a bit of flag at the bottom so I have a nice solid surface on which to put my logo. So I'm just going to drag this all the way down. I am going to click on the background image, which is my student with the book over the head. I'm going to click on that layer, and I'm going to take my Move tool, and I am going to move this up a bit. So I get more of the student and some of the flag. So this now should set me up to work with adding some other shapes, some other colors, and some text, and then actually finalizing your project.